Please welcome Somini Sengupta, international climate correspondent, and her guest, Dr. Mohamed Irfaan Ali, President of Guyana.
Thank you.
Mr. President, welcome to the New York Times Climate Forward event. Thank you for joining us. When we were just backstage, you were telling me that there are more bird species in Guyana than in the entire continental United States. You were very fond of talking about the forested area of Guyana, and you often say that Guyana has a carbon sink. Tell us more about your forests and your biodiversity.
Well, first of all, thank you very much for having me here. The story of Guyana today is one in which oil and gas may dominate the agenda. But really, forests, biodiversity, and our contribution to climate change, our positive contribution to climate change, and keeping the planet alive is a real story of Guyana. We have a forest that is the size of England and Scotland combined, that stores 19.5 gigatons of carbon, that sequesters more than 153 million tons of carbon annually. That forest, of course, constitutes more than 86% of our country. It is the second largest tropical forest cover in the world. It is a forest that has the least deforestation, and we have kept this forest intact. And our development is in accordance with a low-carbon development strategy. And in the low-carbon development strategy, we believe that we can deploy the forests to earn important revenue through the carbon credit market that can help to uplift the lives of people in the country, especially the indigenous people within forested communities.
I wanted to ask you about that. You've put your forest in the carbon market. You're selling carbon credits to an oil company. There's been some concern that you have not gotten the full consent of some of the indigenous people in that area. What's your response to that?
A very simple response. The low-carbon development strategy was crafted after a national consultation with every stakeholder in the country, including every indigenous community. The National Two-Shores Council, which is a council that comprises of all indigenous leaders, are in full support of the strategy. So the strategy is a national strategy that benefited from national consultation. So it is a country strategy and not a government strategy. So basically, that is it. The strategy
so you're saying
came out.
Consent was obtained
Most
fairly?
Fairly.
You know, you are fond of saying that you're a carbon sink. You are earning carbon credits for the forest. At the same time, you're producing carbon emissions by now becoming an oil country. Some would see that you're trying to have it both ways. What would you say to that?
So let us examine that statement. First of all, I would like to complete my statement on what Guyana presents to the world and how we are playing a leading role and acting in a responsible way. We have kept this forest alive. We have foregone a lot of other competing opportunities that one could have had for the country by keeping the forest standing and alive. The world today would have lost in the last 50 years more than 50% of our biodiversity globally.
Globally?
Globally. Guyana is located in two of the richest biodiversity zones, the Amazon and the Guyana Shield, the richest. WWF says that we have one of the highest concentration of biodiversity globally. We are making a commitment to the world. Not only are we keeping the forest standing alive, but we are also going to keep this biodiversity. Whilst in the rest of the world we have lost more than 50%, here is a small developing country that came out of colonial rule, that is making a global commitment that we're going to keep regardless of the development trajectory of the country. We're going to keep that forest, we're going to keep that biodiversity, so we're going to make a meaningful contribution in the climate equation. Now, the question is, the developed world would have gone through different phases of development. Whether you speak about the industrial revolution, now the digital revolution, and the developing world would have lagged behind in many instances, not because of any other reason than the lack of resources. We are a country also that is below sea level, so we understand the effects of climate change more than most. We are part of a region that is most vulnerable to climate events. But where do we find the resources for mitigation and adaptation? No one is coming with a grant to give these countries to invest in adaptation and mitigation. You have to pay at market rates. You have to find the resources. So here is it that you have a country with a newfound resource. We had bauxite, we had gold, diamond, forestry. We could have done like the rest, just went on the economic value of the asset and earn a lot of resources. We now have this newfound resource of oil and gas, and with maximum operation from our oil and gas sector now, we will not even be utilizing 20% of the carbon we sequester from the forests.
So you see no contradiction between selling carbon credits for your forest and producing new carbon dioxide
There is
emissions.
no hypocrisy or contradiction in our development path. We have made it very clear. And we have also said that we must remove the subsidy from petroleum-producing, global subsidies from petroleum-producing countries and companies. We support that too.
Okay. Why embark on oil now when there has been a global commitment to transition away from fossil fuels and a concern that some of what you are banking on, literally, may be a stranded asset, leaving your taxpayers to hold the bag? How long does oil have a future, do you think, in your country?
Well, first of all, we have to examine the premise of the question. If we are saying, we all know that petroleum and the petroleum industry will still have a space in the energy matrix.
For how long?
An energy mix of the future, long into the future.
For how long? In your view?
In my view, long beyond 2050.
Long beyond 2050?
Long beyond 2050. Now, let us say that even if that mix is 25% of the global energy mix, who is going to produce the 25%? Who will determine who produced the 25%? And if it is that the climate equation is the most important equation in determining who produced the 25%, then guess what? The leading country will be Guyana, because we'll be producing the 25% globally with the least damage to the environment, because we're not going to even utilize 20% of the sequestered carbon. I'm not talking about the 19.5 gigatons of carbon that the forest stores. So it is who sets the agenda, who determines the agenda. If you look at the U.S. here, and look at when there's greater demand, what do? You issue more license. You don't cut back license.
You've been an outspoken champion of Guyana having the right to exploit its own resources.
Yes.
And I'm hearing you say oil has a future long past 2050. Is that correct?
I'm being very realistic.
And that Guyana wants to be producing oil long past 2050? Is that what you're saying?
I'm saying three things. One, the reality. Let us examine factually what is taking place. Where is the capital coming from for the developing world for the transition, the just transition into renewables? Where is the battery power coming from? Who controls the market for the battery power? How much of the environment will be subject to destruction to get the raw material for the supply of batteries globally? What is the replacement cost for batteries? What is the financial model in terms of this replacement cost? And who is financing the transition? Those are questions that we seek to avoid. For Guyana, we are very clear. We are very clear as a developing country that we have to find resources. We are below sea level to build sea defenses, to invest in drainage and irrigation structures. No one is giving you preferential financing for that or concessional financing for that. You have to find that resources to protect your country.
Okay, that's an important point. You're saying you have to adapt to climate hazards, yeah? And that you need to raise your own money to do that. Is that, there are other ways to transition your economy. There was a plan to build a hydropower plant. Others might say you have offshore wind potential. Is there investment coming to Guyana to make those kinds of transitions?
So we are also very committed to transitioning to renewable. For a matter of fact, we are doing it at a pace that is more rapid than anyone else. We have also made a commitment that we're going to double the protected area for biodiversity by next year, by the end of 2025. This is a country committing to double the space, the preservation of biodiversity by the end of 2025. And this is a country that is committing to achieving the 30% by 2030 in relation to the protection of biodiversity before 2030. Why isn't that the headline? Why isn't that the subject matter? Name one other location in the developed world that is making this commitment. We have already lost the biodiversity in those countries.
I understand what you're saying. Yeah.
So we have to be fair. Now let me come back to the question. Our hydropower potential. Yes, we're going to pursue that. But
You're
it
still
requires
going to pursue
financing.
that. You were going to build that with some money from Norway.
We are definitely going to pursue that.
Uh-huh.
And then you started by asking me about a consultation, that there are a few persons who might have said they're not in favor of the LCDS. That is democracy. Democracy is that not everybody would agree on everything. So when we were talking about hydro, they were environmentalists, or quote-unquote, persons who consider themselves environmentalists, who are objecting to that, to the hydropower. We are pursuing the hydropower, but still, whether it's wind, whether it's solar, whether it's hydro, still, all of these require capital investment. It requires, if the private sector is doing it, it requires a business model. That business model requires return. So it is not right for us to examine these options without understanding contextually and in reality what the developing world is faced with. The developing world is faced with high debt burden. They're faced with lack of capital. They're faced with the high costs of financing. And then they still have to find money for adaptation and mitigation. So where that leaves you?
I just want to understand this clearly. Are you saying that your cost, you still face too high a cost of capital to invest in things like solar and wind, that you're having, that it's challenging to raise money to build those things?
Yes, I'm saying that the developing world faces an immense challenge to raise capital for all of these things. And if you look at a country that is transitioning, we said that we're going to build 2 power plants with natural gas. That's a transition.
Yes.
Because it's reducing the carbon footprint from petroleum product to natural gas. Now, it is a reality. If we're going to discuss the issue of access to capital, and you ask any leader in the developing world, what is your greatest hindrance to the transformation to renewable? And they will tell you, it is access to capital. It is the cost of capital. That's the reality. That's the reality. And if you look at this reality, you just have to look at the pledges that we make, that we go to COP, an annual pilgrimage. Everybody go to COP. They make the pledges. And then what percentage of those pledges are realized? What we have seen is that the financing gap is expanding every single year. It is not, we are not closing that gap. It is expanding every single year. And that is the real conversation. How do we get this financing gap to be closed? How do we get the countries who make the commitment, who, I give this example. Let me give you an example. The 2 of us are neighbors. You cut down your trees and you build a 14-floor building. I kept my trees. And then the world decided that, you know what? It is very important for us to have the trees. So I'm going to give you a grant to replant trees. But this, your neighbor who kept the trees, no, we're not going to give you anything. Thanks for keeping the trees. Is that the equation?
All right.
Is that the equation?
Let me ask you, you've been very outspoken about your environmental commitments. Your own citizens have been very critical about the deal that Guyana has made with the consortium of oil companies. They have criticized your Environmental Protection Agency for not carrying out sufficient environmental assessments, particularly of the power plant. They've been concerned about impacts on the underground aquifer. They've been concerned that Guyanese taxpayers will be left liable for oil spills because of the kind of liability insurance that you're requiring the oil companies to carry. In one case, a judge in Guyana has called your Environmental Protection Agency derelict and pliant and said its decisions put your citizens and your environment in grave peril. How do you respond? Those are from your own citizens groups.
Well, let us say that democracy is a beautiful thing. And I will continue to ensure that those citizens and everyone have the right to say what they have to say. But let us look at the facts. Yes, citizens say that. You're talking to a leader of a country that by policy has determined that we're going to keep our forests intact. A forest the size of England and Scotland, with the lowest deforestation rate in the world. We have kept that intact, and we're continuing to keep that intact. You're talking to a leader of a country that is saying to you that by policy, we're going to double our conservation area for biodiversity by the end of next year, and we're going to achieve the 30% long before 2030.
That's not addressing the concerns about the oil plant.
It is addressing because it is a reality. The reality is that by policy design, we are keeping this intact. That is important for the life of the planet. On the other equation, yes, you're very correct. You're very correct that, and we have said this, my government was not there. We inherited this agreement. We inherited this agreement with the consortium. But listen, as leaders, there's something called sanctity of contract. Can I just walk in there and decide, okay, this contract was signed, we're going to abandon this contract. We're not going to honor this contract. Then you know what? Right on this stage, you will say that there's a tyrant and dictator in Guyana who does not respect contract, who does not respect the sanctity of contract. And then you might hear that Guyana will be called before every commission globally. So it is that balance. It is understanding reality. In policy making, you know, sometimes leaders, you can point all the fingers at leaders. But in policy making, there are things that you inherit. There are things that successive government inherit. You have to deal with what is before you.
Okay.
So what we have said in dealing with what is before us now is how do we ensure that maximum administratively we maximize the provisions of the contract to the benefit of the country and the benefit of the environment. And that is what we are doing.
You've inherited this deal. Was it a bad deal?
I've said this a number of times. They had the better hand of the deal.
Okay. Is there any universe in which you would renegotiate this deal, or is that off the table?
So we have said that all future PSAs would be different. That
all future oil deals.
All future production sharing agreements will be different. This is not the standard. We have already drafted new PSAs through consultation and export advice, and that is the new. And if you examine the new PSAs, you will see that it's substantially different than the PSA that the consortium enjoys, and that is the fact. But we don't focus on this. We don't focus that this is a government that recognized that they had a bad PSA, had committed itself to design a new PSA, went beyond that and implemented a new PSA, and we're making that known up front, that if you want to be part of the oil and gas sector in Guyana, this is the new PSA. This is what you will have to agree to. It is not shooting in the dark. is giving the investors a full understanding and all stakeholders that this is what the standard, this is a standard we will hold you accountable to. And it's very unfortunate that, colonial countries that went through colonial past goes through very unfortunate global evaluation. Why do I say this? The citizens of my country in colonial rule did not have access to many things, did not have opportunities. They were not considered worthy enough to have education. So countries that came out of colonial rule had to first struggle to give their citizens dignity, then to give their citizens opportunity, then to invest in their citizens so that they can have a good life. And now we are at a phase of development where this is a new a country that has this new resource. We are now building capacity. I'm not here to say to you that we have all the capacity. Yes, there are deficits in the capacity, whether it's in the Environmental Protection Agency, whether it's in the building out of the healthcare sector. There are capacity constraints, human resource capacity constraints. But what are we doing? We are ensuring that we buy the best skills, adopt the best practices, invest in the training of that human resources so that we can bridge this capacity gap.
I'm glad you brought up the resource question. Norway is often brought up as an example of a country that has used its oil wealth to improve its citizens' well-being and its standard of life. Norway has over 75% taxes on oil extraction. You have a very favorable tax rate. What is your tax rate on oil extraction?
Well, first of all, it's a
direct question.
No, it's
compared to Norway. What is your?
It's not a direct question. It's a question that must be answered in context. You're talking about a country that is new in oil and gas versus Norway that has decades of oil and gas experience and oil and gas revenue. Norway has decades upon decades of oil and gas revenue.
And we interviewed their prime minister here.
That they utilize to make their economy competitive, to diversify their economy, to expand services, to open up opportunity, and to create world-class citizens. We are now into this. So what is our priority?
What's your tax rate?
Our priority is to do exactly what Norway did. To invest, to ensure our people, every single family, prosperity must come to every single family. We must have world-class health care, world-class education, world-class infrastructure. We must now have the opportunity to invest in a much-needed infrastructure that will expand our ecotourism. We'll have the opportunity now to ensure Guyana is the breadbasket of the Caribbean by investing in farm-to-market access road, by investing in drainage and irrigation structure, by investing in sea defenses. And when we get to that point, that Norway had the opportunity to get to after decades of revenue earned from the oil and gas sector, when we get to that point, then we can implement anything that Norway implemented and even do it better. Now, let me say this.
What about your tax rate?
Let me say this.
What about your tax rate?
Let me come back to this. On the topic of Norway, we have done such an exceptional job at the environment, that we're the first country to sign, you talk about the carbon market, we're the first country to sign a bilateral agreement, and that was with the Kingdom of Norway for carbon credit and for the safeguard of our forests, for more than $270 million. And you have to give us credit, because the world has been trying to make, and let me put this, I know time is running, but let me say this. How can you have an honest discussion on the future of petroleum if we lock the petroleum companies and countries out of that discussion? I believe to have that honest discussion, we must put every stakeholder in the room. We must get guarantees from the companies and countries that they're going to invest in research and development, they're going to invest in technology, they're going to invest in the green transition, and that is what is important.
I have one very last question. You have a territorial dispute with Venezuela over the oil region, Essequibo. We have 20 minutes left. How are you positioning yourself in the event of military action by Venezuela?
We don't have a territorial dispute. We have a territorial controversy. And we believe strongly that in the rule of law, in international law, and that is why we are pursuing this in a peaceful way. And we encourage Venezuela to participate in the ICJ. I'm very pleased that Venezuela is participating in the ICJ.
International Court of Justice.
Yes, and all we are doing, as we will do, is to ask Venezuela to respect the outcome of the ICJ and let us live as neighbors that are peaceful and seek to enhance the development of our people in a democratic environment where the rule of law applies.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Great honor.